Praise the Lord. I greet you all in the matchless name of our Lord and Master Jesus Christ. Well, this morning I don't have a story as I usually do when I start off, but I want to remind you of that old-time favorite. What a friend we have in Jesus. I'm sure every one of us know that song. Even a little three-year-old child will probably be able to sing it. But if you turn with me to the final chapter of the Gospel of John, chapter 21, from verses 1 to 19, you will find that John reveals himself as a true friend of the fallen. I want to start off by asking, who is a friend? What comes to your mind when you hear the word friend? You know, a British publication ran a competition and offered a prize for the best definition of a friend. Many thousands of entries poured in, but the winner was, a friend is the one who comes in when the whole world has gone out. Wow. And that's what I think Jesus is to all of us. The Bible is filled with stories of friendship. David and Jonathan, Elijah and Elisha, Paul and Timothy. But today I want to take a few minutes to look at how deeply Jesus wants to have a personal friendship with all of us. Jesus, I believe, is a true friend, and more so a friend of the fallen. What the Lord did for Peter that we're just going to read about, He can do for you and me if we respond the right way. And I'm talking about what a friend we have in Jesus. And for that, I'm going to cover four short points. What a friend we have in Jesus. 4 quick, short points. Well, the first one is Peter's failure. Now, I'm not going to John. Let's go to Matthew 26, verses 69 to 75. You can do the reading at home, right? Here we notice that Peter boasted that he would never forsake the Lord. In these few verses, we find how Peter boasts that he's never going to forsake the Lord. Yet, when Jesus was arrested, Peter, like all the others, forsook Jesus and ran. But stealthily, he sees from afar off what they are going to do with Jesus. He even goes to the extent of denying the Lord. But that night, I guess he just couldn't sleep. He must have wept bitterly. He knew that he had wronged the Lord. He was a miserable man. He failed big time. Many of us would say that we would never do anything like this. But we are all guilty of denying the Lord in some way or the other. Maybe we've stopped reading the Bible, or we've stopped praying, or we've just backslid. And this can cause pain, sorrow, and confusion in our lives. See, backsliding makes one a very miserable person. Remember the prodigal son, what happened to him? You will never lose your salvation, but you could lose your fellowship, leading to a loss of peace and joy. Well, the first point was we saw Peter's failure. Now we see point number 2, Peter's foolishness. Now turn with me, go back to John 21, right? You see verse 3 of this chapter 21. I'm talking about Peter's foolishness. After the resurrection, Peter assumed that his ministry was over now. So he decided to return to his old way of life. He must have thought, who cares? Well, I have a family to support. Peter was called, remember, to be a fisher of men. But he goes back to his old trade of fishing fish. He joined his old friends. The consequences, they fished all night. The Bible tells us they fished all night, and though being professional fishermen, they caught nothing. People who are out of God's will always make wrong choices, always on fleshly motives and not spiritual ones. And they always drag others, as Peter did to his friends here. And no matter what you try to accomplish on your own strength, it always comes to nothing. We need to depend on Jesus for everything. We can produce nothing of lasting value with our own efforts. So we see in the first point, Peter's failure. Point number 2 that we just covered, Peter's foolishness. And now we go to point number 3, Peter's friend. And this we see in verse 17 4 to 17 of chapter 21. 4 to 17 of chapter 21. You can read it on your own, right? Even though Peter had wandered into sin, he still hadn't gone so far that the Lord had stopped loving him. Peter still had a friend in a very high place. That friend made all the difference for Peter, and he will do so for you and me too today. When Jesus stepped in, 3 things happened. See, when Jesus stepped into Peter's life, 3 things happened. Number 1, Peter was forced to admit his failure. There must always be an acknowledgement of a slip up and wrongdoing. Number 2, Peter obeyed Jesus. And number 3, Peter had a renewed desire to be near the Lord. See, we see in verses 9 to 14, Jesus even fed him. How wonderful, Jesus even fed him. He not only found a Savior who loved him unconditionally, but also provided all that he needed by feeding him, providing warmth and fellowship. All the provision at one place, just because he found Jesus. Everything they lacked on that boat that day, they found when they came to Jesus. Some of you may have toiled and labored on your own efforts. You may be feeling miserable with no peace and joy. But remember, Jesus is waiting for you like he did for Peter. In verses 15 to 17, we find the Lord recommissioned Peter for service. It says he recommissioned Simon Peter for service. Peter must have felt that his work and his ministry was forever gone. But we find that Jesus freed Peter of his faults and failure and set him back in his ministry. And the same can happen for you and me, or for each of us. So we see 3 points: Peter's failure, Peter's foolishness, and Peter's friend. And now we go to the last and final point, Peter's future. And this we see in verses 18 to 19, Peter's future. These verses tell us what the future would hold for this restored man of God. What was in store for this restored man of God? Verses 18 and the first part of verse 19 tells us his life was one of sacrifice. His life was one of sacrifice. Now when I talk of his life being a life of sacrifice, Peter was eventually put to death by crucifixion, and that at his own request. He requested for it. He asked for it. He was crucified upside down because he did not feel worthy to die like Jesus. In the second part of verse 19, we find his life was one of service. Not only sacrifice, it was a life of service. His life was to glorify the Lord. He no longer lived for self. It was to glorify God. And in the last part of that verse 19, the last line there, the last few words, his life was one of surrender. His life was not only sacrifice, service, it was also a life of surrender. The last call Jesus gives Peter is the same as the very first call, which was follow me. Which tells us that the Lord hasn't changed and will not change. Regardless of how deep we fall, the Lord won't change his mind about you and me. See, the Bible tells us greater love has no man than this, that he laid down his life for his friends. He said, you are my friends. That's what he's called you and me. What a powerful statement. And what is even more important is that he made this statement in the upper room just hours before he was to be betrayed, arrested, tried, and crucified. In closing, may I ask you, what does your future hold for you? Misery and difficulty, or peace, joy, and blessings? The answer, I believe, is in who you follow, leading me to a beautiful story of how one's pastor was struggling to prepare a message for the church and didn't want to be disturbed by his 5-year-old daughter. So he took out a map from his books and tore that map into pieces and gave it to his 5-year-old daughter to assemble with the promise that he would answer all her questions and play with her when she was done fixing that map back together. He knew she would never be able to fix it, so he thought, okay, I could use this time to prepare my message. But to his amazement, in less than 5 minutes, she returned to him in a study with the map in perfect shape. Every continent and every country in its place. The surprised father asked, honey, how you don't know anything about geography. So how did you fix the world so easily and quickly? The 5-year-old girl smiled and replied, well, Dad, the picture of Jesus was the back of the map. And I knew that if I have Jesus in the right place, the whole world would be in perfect shape. Wow. That was the right inspiration he needed for his message that morning. Fix your world by placing Jesus at the right place. Today, I leave you with this thought, to just place Jesus in his rightful place and all your life will be in order. Amen. Bless you all.